recorded as well. So I see people are starting to join us. So we'll give everybody a few minutes to come in. While everybody, I mean, I know it's a little early and people are just now starting to join us, but while we're waiting for everybody to get kind of settled in. Hello, Jill. Hello, Renee.
Hi.
Hello. Hi.
Jill, tell us where you're calling in from today.
I'm in London in the UK, where we've got a heat wave as well, by the way. It's really lovely here.
Oh,
we're not used to it. We've had a wet, cold summer, and then all of a sudden this week, when the schools go back, it's brilliant sunshine.
And I'm seeing, sleeveless. So yeah,
Yeah.
you got some good weather going on there.
We have.
Always curious. So because I'm terrible at doing the time difference thing. What time is it there right now?
6 o'clock in the evening, which is perfect, because I have been doing other events recently and I accidentally agreed to one that took place between 1 a.m. and 2 a.m. our time. And it was my fault because I got confused about how you converted mountain time.
Oh, right.
Anyway, I managed.
And you know what? We did that accidentally too. And I can't remember who it was. And she was such a trooper and she stayed up until like midnight to do I was just like, and it just didn't dawn on any of us that it was
I can manage midnight.
Oh my God. Renee, where are you calling in with us today?
Chicago. And we had a really fall day yesterday.
Oh.
It was just, I was sad.
Oh, were you?
So today the sun is out a little bit today, but it was like rainy and cold. I put on a coat, it's like,
oh, not that good brisk fall weather then.
No. It was like the teaser of what's to come.
Oh yeah.
No.
My daughter lives in she used to live in the city, but she lives out in LaGrange now.
LaGrange is lovely.
Yeah, so it's so I love going and visiting her there. So today some people have joined us, so we're going to start up here a little bit. So today Jill and Renee are going to chat. Well, first of all, happy International Beauty Day.
Yeah.
Could not have picked a better day to have these two wonderful authors join us to talk about these iconic and legendary women. So both from Renee's book and Jill from your new book too. So this is really fun to have it happen on International Beauty Day. But for today, Renee and Jill are going to talk after I go over the screen for about 30-35 minutes. The chat is open and there's a little Q&A button down at the bottom. We love audience questions. So after they're done chatting, if you have some questions for either one of them, please go ahead and put that into the chat or preferably in the Q&A, but if you can't find it, put it in the chat and I'll get to that. So no worries on that. We'd also love to know where you're all calling in from. So go ahead and put that in the chat too. It's always fun to see where everybody's, I think I've turned the chat on. Let me look here real quick. Yeah, it looks like everybody can chat with each other. So that's a good thing. Also, what I'm going to do in that chat section is I'm going to put the link to Warwick's. Just real quick, Warwick's, I forgot to tell you where we're at. We're located in San Diego, actually La Jolla, California, a little bit north of San Diego. So we've got the country covered, international. We got, hopefully you're calling in from all over the place today. In the comment section or the chat section, I'm also going to put links on how to order both Jill and Renee's books. Oh, we got Annapolis, Maryland.
Annapolis.
I love it. And then Woodlands, Texas. Love it. Hello. We love everybody calling in from different places. Yeah. So I'll put those links in. Real easy to for us to ship those books out to you. We always appreciate you ordering books from Warwick's, but whatever you do, if you can't order from Warwick's, support your local independent bookstore because we'd love to make sure that your local stays around with us too. Ours has been here since 1896. So hopefully we can have some others staying around that long. All right, I've given everybody enough time to join us here. So I'm going to very quickly introduce these lovely authors, and then I will go off screen. Excuse me. Speaking of our heat wave, it's getting to me. So Jill Paul has written 12 historical novels, many of them reevaluating real 20th century, maybe it's 12, maybe it's 13 now. I don't know. Maybe this is an old bio. 20th century women and trying to get inside their heads. Her books have reached the top of the USA Today, Toronto Globe and Mail, and UK charts, and have been translated into 23 languages. Wow. Joining Jill today to talk about A Beautiful Rival, a novel of Helena Rubinstein and Elizabeth Arden, is Renee Rosen. Renee is a USA Today bestselling author whose books include The Social Graces, Park Avenue Summer, Windy City Blues, and White Collar Girl. Her newest book, Fifth Avenue Glamour Girl, retells the origin and rise of famed businesswoman and cosmetics empire mogul Estee Lauder. So 3 amazing women in the beauty industry. Can't wait for this conversation. Ladies, we'll see you in a little bit.
Thanks,
Okay.
Julie.
Thanks, Julie. Wow. So Jill, this is exciting. This has been a conversation in the makings for a long time. I remember you reached out to me and you said, I heard you writing about Estee Lauder. I'm writing about Helena Rubinstein. So International Beauty Day and at Warwick. So this is exciting. I'm going to gush for just a minute about your book before I get into I have so many questions to ask you. So I was fortunate enough to read an advanced copy, and I just want people to know that they're in for such a treat with this book. I mean, not only do you trace the origins of the cosmetic industry and how that came about, and these 2 powerhouses who really kicked it off, but also you give such an intimate portrait of 2 very complex women, and you cover world wars, you cover the stock market crash. I mean, it's just a very rich, just dazzling world that you recreated. So people are in for a real treat. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
So I wanted to get started with Elizabeth Arden and Helena Rubinstein. They actually are very similar in some respects and yet polar opposites. And I would love to get your take on that, and how this whole toxic relationship got started between the 2 of them.
Yeah, it's an interesting story. What they had in common was that they were both in at the start of the modern beauty industry. They really were the people that started persuading women that you just had to buy their products to reverse the signs of aging, and it was our duty to look young. And Helena actually advertised, it was quite shocking, some of the things she said. Helena said, has he said he loves you lately? If not, you need my endocrine hormone cream. And they were just so pushy, both of them. Do you know, loads of women in the 19th century and earlier had small businesses. You know, these 2, they could have just set up a little salon somewhere, made a couple of creams and made a very comfortable living. But both of them just thought big, and they wanted, even before they became rivals, they just wanted to expand their businesses and become global. And what drove them? I mean, I have my theory about this. I think with Elizabeth Arden, she came from a very, very poor background in Woodbridge, Ontario. She was the 4th of 5 children to a tenant farmer, and they really were scraping around for food and wearing hand-me-down clothes, and it was quite a miserable childhood. So when she arrived in Manhattan and she started working at a beauty salon and seeing these incredibly glamorous, wealthy women coming in their furs and jewels, Elizabeth didn't just want to treat them, she wanted to be them. And she started changing her accent and trying to behave like them.
Yeah.
With Helena,
she really did.
She really did. With Helena, I think the key to her ambition came from a very tragic family rift that happened when she was 20 years old, when her father threw her out of home for refusing to marry the man of his choice. And it seems to me, from my reading of all I could find about Helena, that she was driven to try and prove herself to this father who disowned her. So they've got this in common. They're both pretending to be something they're not. You know, Elizabeth is pretending to be posh. Helena was pretending that she'd studied medicine at Krakow University, that she'd studied skin science under the top European experts. And by the way, her creams are made from magical anti-aging Carpathian herbs, which nobody's ever been able to track down. So, you know, on the business, on this side, they're both kind of pretending, and, you know, they've got secrets to hide. But also they've got disastrous love lives because they focus so much on their business career. They've got loads in common.
And passions, like, you know, Helena was an art collector.
Yeah.
And Elizabeth was a horse collector.
Yeah.
So, you know, they had these really sort of extravagant and pricey hobbies.
Absolutely.
know?
Yeah. No, that's a really interesting part of them. I mean, Helena didn't just collect art, she encouraged young artists, she supported them. She had a big collection of African art, very important collection of African sculpture at the time. But the fact that she could just wander into Picasso's studio and ask him to do some sketches of her and is
Yeah,
amazing. And to get Salvador Dali just to paint a triptych for her Park Avenue penthouse. I guess that amount of money helps. And with
yeah.
Elizabeth, the horses thing, I think, goes back to her childhood on the farm. She'd loved horses then. And when she could afford it, she started investing in racehorses. And it paid off in 1947, just after the end of my novel, when Jet Pilot won the Kentucky Derby, which I believe is a very prestigious race to win.
They probably could have been friends had they not been competing against each other. And I
Yeah.
keep going back and forth about who started it. This is my theory. I'm just curious. I think that because Elizabeth was already here in the States and then Helena came onto her turf, I think in my mind, that's what got under Elizabeth's skin in
Yeah.
the first place. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I agree. Elizabeth had, in 1915, when Helena crossed the Atlantic to start her first Manhattan salon, Elizabeth already had a Manhattan salon, a Washington, D.C. one as well, and a handful of perfectly good products. She was bigger on packaging, Elizabeth. She wanted everything to look right. It was all about the appearance of things for her. But Helena arrived and she took out adverts in Vogue and Harper's Bazaar and so forth, saying, the acknowledged expert in beauty, who serves the royalty, aristocracy, and artistes across Europe. That's her first initial adverts coming into the States. And the next thing Helena did, which is quite aggressive, she recognized, I think before Elizabeth did, how important department stores were going to be for selling their products. And Helena set off on a countrywide tour, speaking to audiences of department store staff and explaining to them how to become Helena Rubinstein girls. I mean, that's going to wind Elizabeth up for sure. So, yeah, it was bad. And Elizabeth is just scared, deep down, she's got this fear of losing it all, of being found out that because she was ashamed of her background, that she had grown up very poor. She didn't want anybody to find that out. And she was scared of losing it all because she'd worked so hard to get there.
Yeah.
So yeah, they
And
were
isn't
always going
it?
to be rivals. Both of them wanted to be the best. They didn't
Oh, and
just
they
want to
did.
exist side by side. I mean, Elizabeth was very paranoid about loads of competitors, Dorothy Gray, Eleanor Adair. And then, of course, when Estee and Charles Revson come in the scene in the 30s, they were big
Yeah.
rivals as well. Yeah.
Yeah. But you know what I found so fascinating just about all of these titans of the cosmetic industry, except for Charles Revson, is that, makeup in and of itself is there to conceal, enhance, embellish. And that's what these women did with their past, particularly Elizabeth Arden and in
Yeah.
Este's case. But Elizabeth Arden really kind of mastered that,
Yeah.
with her affected speech and all that. So it's kind of a nice metaphor.
It
Um,
is. Yeah.
and
Pretending to be what they're not.
they were such hard-headed businesswomen. What do you think their greatest sales tactics, like you said about going into the department stores, but like what was it that made them so successful? How were they able to, surmount these obstacles against them?
Stubbornness, really. I mean, I just think they wouldn't take no for an answer. And this really is an era where it was extraordinarily hard for women to start their own businesses. There's no way they could go to a bank and get a bank loan. Neither of them had wealthy families or rich husbands to bankroll it. They did it themselves with just grit, determination, worked their way up. And didn't take no for an answer, didn't accept that there was any glass ceiling at all. Both of them had different skill sets. So with Elizabeth, she was very good on the treatment side. Seemingly, she gave an excellent massage, and she was good on the package. She had beautiful packaging in her paradise pink colors that she liked. Whereas Helena had learned how to mix creams herself from an elderly pharmacist in Australia, showed her how to use sheep's lanolin and scent it and whip it and turn it into this emulsion that could be put on the skin. And she loved the science side of things. She had what she called her kitchen at her apartments, where she would blend and see what new ingredients she could add into the mix. So they're coming in with different skills, but basically They just didn't take no for an answer. Helena said in later life that with her product and Elizabeth's packaging, they could have ruled the world. But, you know, if you look at that, that's a real put down, isn't it? Elizabeth's were only good for the packaging.
Not so much of what was inside it, which makes me wonder, were they more concerned, like, were they truly concerned about making women beautiful and caring for their skin, or were they just looking to make money?
Probably money, I would say. But they came, I mean, they could have sold the proverbial ice cubes to Eskimos, I think. They could have sold cans of baked beans, but they came along at a time when everything was ripe for the beauty industry to grow. So, for example, we've got, you know, 1892, Vogue was founded, and women could read in this glossy magazine about, you know, all the rich and beautiful people. And then the department stores starting, as I said, but also it was makeup becoming socially acceptable at that time. It really, really helped them. You know, just, I mean, partly that was the silent movie stars with their huge dark eyes and dark Cupid's bow lips, made it, and flappers as well. So makeup was coming into, you know, these people's lives.
Because prior to that, it was really, you know, actresses and prostitutes, right? So it was not for the common woman, but I feel like those two really helped open the door.
They did it very subtly at first. I mean, Elizabeth had a cream that was produced. She hired a chemist, by the way, Fabian Swanson, a Swedish chemist, and improved her products massively in response to the competition from Helena. And he found a way to incorporate a powder into her face creams that just gave a kind of even skin tone. So I can just imagine her in her salon saying, a little something to brighten your complexion, dear. She called everyone dear. Estee did as well, didn't she?
And didn't go quite as far as Max Factor with the pancake.
No, it was much more subtle than that.
They were inching people along.
She did it very gradually, because the last thing she wanted was to alienate any of her kind of upper class clientele. She also, there's one story that she supplied red lipsticks to the women and the suffrage march in Manhattan in 1912, but I think that's really unlikely. Something that she would be happy to associate herself with later. And of course, she started painting her salon doors this deep shade of red, the red salon, which was associated with suffrage at that time.
And you know, you're writing about, it's a work of fiction, but yet you're writing about two real women. So how do you find that place between fiction and historical events and people? And I think every writer has to find their way through that. I'm just curious how you do it.
Yeah, I want to ask you this question as well, but it's a decision that we all make. And with me, I've written a previous book was about Jackie Kennedy and Maria Callas and their rivalry over the Greek shipping millionaire Aristotle Onassis, another two women who were rivals. And there are so many biographies and so much is known about both these women that I had to stick very closely to the facts. I felt I couldn't make it up. But with Helen and Elizabeth, there are huge gaps in the narrative. There's a wonderful book by Lindy Woodhead called War Paint that was published in 2003, and that's about their feud. And it's where I first learned that these two had a 50-year feud. 5 decades they were fighting each other and sabotaging each other's businesses and planting stories in the press. And Lindy Woodhead's book is great, and it's very thoroughly researched and footnoted and whatever. But the biographies of Elizabeth and Helena, there's a couple, they have one each by people who'd worked for them in the past, and they're really not very nice about them at all. They're kind of what I call hatchet jobs. And so it was difficult, and there's big gaps in the information. I mean, even just going to their dates of birth, every single source you look at will give you different dates of birth for the two of them. You know, the biographies, Wikipedia, the obituaries, the articles that were written about them in their lifetime, because they lied about everything to the press anyway. So where there's big gaps in the narrative, I know, where there's big gaps in the narrative, I feel I have more freedom to to make things up. So, for example, Lindy Woodhead said that they clearly were, they had industrial espionage going on against each other, but she doesn't say how, because she doesn't know how. None of us know how. But I felt that that gave me permission to invent the character of Edith, whom Helena plants in Elizabeth's salon, who will feed back information. I thought, yeah, I can get away with that.
Yeah. Oh,
How
yeah.
about you? What
And
do you do where do you draw your line?
You know, it depends. Like, when I was doing the Social Graces, which was Caroline Astor and Al Vanderbilt, again, we're going back so far in time that I could, you know,
Yeah.
I can sort of play with a few things and make some assumptions about them. Someone like Estee Lauder, who is so, you know, a brand name and everybody, you know, knows a little something about her. I stayed really close to the facts about her, but I did bring in a fictional character as the narrator
Gloria,
to sort of, you know, but it's always a bit of a, you know, can I do this? Can I not do this? I try and stay as close to the facts as I can, but I don't want to, by the same token, I don't want to serve up something that's already out there, you know, say in a Wikipedia article or
of course.
or in, you know, some nonfiction. So I want to make it, you know, I want to be able to give the reader something different. So we kind of go back and forth on that, you know, fiction, nonfiction.
Yeah, but I mean, they're so different. When I started out, you know, I read Lindy Woodhead's book, obviously. There's also a PBS documentary called The Powder and the Glory, which is great because I get to see them actually talking and, you know, hear what they sounded like. Elizabeth is so posh. And there's also, you know, there was the Broadway show, War Paint in 2017, which I missed, but you can catch extracts from it on YouTube. So the first thing I did when I was considering the idea was watch and read all of these to think, is there something I can add here? Is there a new story to be told, or has it all been told already? And I decided that they were all bound, but well, not the Broadway show, which was kind of funny and bitchy, and but Lindy Woodhead tells the fact. She tells what happened and when it happened and where it happened, but she can't speculate because she's, as a non-fiction writer, she's bound by the facts. So she says they sabotaged each other's advertising campaigns and they copied each other's products. But I had, you know, when you're writing that in a novel, you actually have to dramatize it. You had to decide which products they might have copied and turn it into a story. So there just seems to be big gaps that I could step into and wave my fictional magic wand. And also, of course, you know, one of the big problems was that as far as we know, well, there's no record of Elizabeth and Helena ever meeting. And I had this problem as well when I wrote about Jackie Kennedy and Maria Callas. There's no record of them ever. In fact, I'm pretty sure they never did meet. But you can't do that in a story. You've got to make your narrative arc beginning, middle, end, and readers expect the end of a story to tie up what's happened earlier. So when I'm writing about two rivals, I had to have them meet somehow, you know, in the way that Batman has to confront the Joker at the end of the movie. It just had to go that way. But so I just
were you at all intimidated to bring the two together, or were you just like, nope, this has to happen?
No, I thought it had to happen. I let them have a few little brushes with each other all the way through, and then the build up to the encounter at the end. And I'll be using, you know, my take on their characters to imagine how I think they would have approached each other in that final scene. Because of course we're like actors, really, you and me, Renee. We're stepping into trying to imagine what it felt like to be in their shoes. But if another novelist wrote the same novel, they would possibly come up with a different vision, because you can't help putting in your own expectations and your own cultural past into it.
Although there is a point where they take over and they tell us their stories. So I'm curious because, you know, Helena and Elizabeth were not easy women to capture, and you did it so beautifully. So was it difficult to sort of zero in on both of them, and what were the challenges in writing them? And, you know, did you favor one over the other? And
when you've got two characters, it doesn't matter if readers don't like one of them as much as the other, I don't think, but they've got to be invested in both stories. So you've got to keep the action moving on both sides. And my story is told chapter about Elizabeth Helena throughout. So Elizabeth is harder to like because she's a snob, and that's just not a likable quality in anybody's world. And she's also anti-Semitic, not huge, but in as much as people tended to be in that era. I mean, she said really stupid things like, oh, it's not chic to be Jewish or Catholic, it's chic to be Episcopalian. And you're like, oh, for goodness sake, Elizabeth, do yourself a favor.
Those are
so yeah, no, but I also felt from the start that she was the loneliest woman in the world. So I always felt very sympathetic towards her. I don't know whether readers will, but hopefully they'll be interested in her story as they go through. But it's the balancing act. The anti-Semitism was something that I hadn't anticipated. I mean, I should have, but when I decided on the subject, I was thinking about the feud, and I thought that's going to be fun to write about. But it's so clearly there all the way through. And I don't have Jewish blood as far as I know. Maybe we all do somewhere. But so I did get my publisher in the States to hire a sensitivity reader for this because my plot touches on the Holocaust later on. And I just wanted to make sure that nothing would be offensive. But what did happen is, you know, to Helena when she moved to the States was, you know, she was turned down for the leases of salons. She was turned down for apartments. There were hotels she couldn't stay in. Elizabeth's favorite restaurant at the time, the Colony Club, wouldn't allow anybody Jewish, Catholic, or with any skin color other than white. So, you know, she was confronting that. She could have changed her name, and many Jews coming to the States did change their name in that era. But Helena just was not the kind of person who would ever run for this. She would always stand up to bigots wherever she went. And she could have taken her husband Edward's name, Edward Titus. He'd changed his surname, and she could have hidden behind that. But she was never a woman to hide behind a man. In fact, it was my editor that pointed out to me when they'd been there a year in the States and they bought a place in Greenford, Connecticut. And my editor said there's no way they would have been able to buy in Greenford, Connecticut with a Jewish name. So I got Edward to be the one buying the house, but I had no idea about any of this really. So that was quite a learning curve for me, reading up about all this, and something that the sensitivity reader helped me with as well. I did want to ask you about Este's attitude to being Jewish. In that era.
She was very different from Helena. And as I was reading, I was kind of comparing the two in my mind. But like Helena Rubinstein really embraced her Judaism. She was proud of it. If somebody wouldn't rent her an apartment in the building, she'd buy the building. You know, she was, you know. But now Este had an event in her life early on that I think really shaped her. She was sort of courting this socialite in Palm Beach named Susie Guest. She was, you know, that was the clientele she was going after. And Susie Guest had taken her to her Palm Beach country club, and they threatened to cancel her membership if she ever brought Este there again because she was Jewish. And I think that set off just alarms in Este's, you know, she was already like, people, you know, I can't tell people where I'm really from. I can't, you know, if I'm in the glamour business, I have to give myself every advantage. And if I'm Jewish, that's going to wipe out a whole, you know, a whole market that won't buy from me because I'm Jewish. So she very much, you know, she hid it and then, you know, came around, but she was really afraid to let anybody know her religious affiliation.
Well, understandably for the era.
Yeah. And so, and then, you know, you were speaking about Jackie and your previous book and all, Maria, which was another wonderful book. I love that. But how do you go about selecting? What do you look for in the characters and the subjects that you take on? Like, what needs to click with you? And say,
kind of my brand, you know, publishers like you to have a brand, and my brand is kind of writing about women, mostly the first half of the 20th century, who I feel have been misrepresented by their biographers or ignored in some cases. It's got to be women for me who stepped outside the normal roles allotted to them of sort of wife and mother. So women who were quite strong and feisty and talented, who have some particular talent, perhaps. That might be something I'm looking for. But I also love what I call difficult, or what possibly male biographers would call difficult women. I love difficult women in real life as well as in novels. My aunt was one. I always wished I could be more difficult. I think I'm too much of a people pleaser sometimes. But yeah, no, I like people who really stand up to authority. But then again, as you know, when you're looking for your next novel, you've got to find, in all the mass of facts and information that make up a person's life, you've got to be able to see a story arc that will make a novel. Because biographies aren't novels, they're just a massive, this happened and that happened and that happened. And we need to find an arc that's got some
that
kind
changes
of
our characters. And
as they
so
go
they're
along.
not the same people at the end of the book that they were in the beginning.
Hopefully, they learn something along the way. There might be a quest, or the how to write books tell you they must have a quest. both Elizabeth and Helen and Esther as well, they all had a quest to like world domination of the beauty industry, basically. I think they all wanted to be the top. So that's what I'm looking for. Complicated, difficult women with a story, women who stepped outside of the role that society allowed them at the time.
So is there do you just keep your sort of ear to the ground to see who's out there, or do you?
I do a lot of Googling around about people that I'm interested in. I read non-fiction books, and sometimes it's just a comment in a footnote that gives you an idea. The Jackie and Maria book was so fortuitous. That was a reader in Athens emailed me and said, "Why don't you write about Jackie Kennedy and Maria Callas?" And it was like a pinball machine lighting up. I went, "Yes, I really want to do this."
Oh no, and that was fabulous. I learned so much. That's what I love about your books, is that I learned so much.
Thank you. Well, yours too. Yeah.
How did you tackle the research for this book? You covered so much ground.
Lindy Woodhead and the hostile biographies of both of them. Elizabeth and Helena wrote a sort of autobiography stroke memoir called My Life and Beauty, but it glosses over absolutely everything. Doesn't really mention why her first marriage broke up, so there's this kind of leap. And she just likes hectoring women about how they should be cleansing their skin and what they should be eating and how much they should be exercising. That's them. And with Elizabeth as well, she wrote a number of pamphlets about health and beauty, but nothing very personal. So I just Googled around and found what I could. There's a fantastic website, which I'm sure you know about, called cosmeticsandskin.com, which has been compiled by a man called James Bennett, who I've actually been in email contact with. It's a complete labor of love. He has gone back to the beginnings of the beauty industry, when it was just basically Pear's soap and glycerin and rosewater, and he's listed every single product chronologically, and he's got a section for each of the big beauty tycoons, and he goes through listing all their products, their salons, their adverts, and he's collected all the visual material as well. So when I was trying to see how Helen and Elizabeth might have stolen each other's adverts, he's got them all there with the wording. Absolutely.
Isn't that a great read?
And it's just a labor of love. It's something he did for fun.
When you find a resource like that, that's a gift from the writing gods.
I know. It's amazing what's out there. I don't know how people wrote books before the internet.
I know. So I want to make sure we leave time for questions for everyone, but I do have just another question I want to ask you about, seeing as it is International Beauty Day. What is your take on beauty and cosmetics today? And what is it? How has the modern industry changed from the days of Helena and Elizabeth and?
Well, there's tighter regulation over it now. You can't. They got into trouble with the Food and Drugs Administration for calling things skin food, and Elizabeth objected. She said, "You can eat them if you want to," but. Nowadays, it's more tightly regulated how you can advertise your products, but you still, and in fact, I'm still gullible enough to buy the serums that say reverse aging. I mean, obviously they don't reverse
Oh,
aging. Nothing can reverse aging. It's
I have
just
so much
crazy.
stuff on at night. I'm going to slide out of the bed. You know, I've got all the, you know, this
But
serum
I
and
was
that
looking at
serum.
the kind of the way that they target young people nowadays, and they're like, be your true self when they're advertising a whole new range of makeup. And I'm like, how's that your true self?
Yeah,
That seems to be the message nowadays, you know, the empowering. Makeup will empower you, and presumably you're more empowered by not wearing makeup, but I don't know.
yeah.
But
And
yeah,
it is interesting how the industry has kind of come full circle. Like they started with their spas and that, but and then it was the department stores. But now people are going more online
online
and
again.
going back into like beauty salons and things like that
Absolutely.
and spas. So it's kind of come full circle, which
Well,
is
my
I think
niece, who's a
interesting.
teenager, watches hundreds of videos, TikTok videos, on how to spend like an hour creating the no makeup look. That's what
Yeah.
she does. And she tells me off because I don't use contouring and highlighting. I'm like, what? I'm quite busy, by the way. But yeah, that's what they do nowadays. Watch TikTok videos about it.
Yeah.
Extraordinary. Hi, Judy.
Hello,
I'm
Julie.
back. I'm back. And Renee, I'm so glad that you ended with that question, because that was one of my first questions I was going to pose to actually both of you about the today's beauty industry, but more, are there going to be characters like Helena and Estee and Elizabeth in this new beauty world? Because when you think about, like, especially Estee and Elizabeth, they've somehow been able to stay relevant to generations of cosmetic, you know, their cosmetics are still out. I think Elizabeth's are still out there to the next,
Helena Rubinstein's are still out there as well. Her company's owned by L'Oreal now.
Okay.
Which we'll be happy about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering if you think that there's going to be these characters in some of the newer cosmetic companies that are popping up, if there's going to be like that longevity in that thing. I don't know. It's a hard one to ask or answer, I'm sure.
I don't know. I think as the baby boomers continue to age, you know, there's going to be some, you know, different approach to makeup and aging and embracing, you know, we are what we are. We can't all look 35 forever. And,
right.
You know, I don't know. It's going to be interesting to watch.
Yeah, absolutely.
It'll definitely be interesting to watch if there's any that have the longevity that these women's products and companies have had. Because it's pretty spectacular when you think about it.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, they set the trend. They changed the whole face of they created the industry and then changed the face of it.
Right.
And not just the beauty industry. I think they really raised the bar and shattered glass ceilings for all women in business coming after them. They just, you know, they didn't take no for an answer. When Helena went to venture capitalists to try and raise money to sell her American company in 1928, there were so many that just wouldn't take her meeting. And whether because she was a woman or because she was Jewish, she never quite knew. And she persevered and she got what she wanted and drove it through. And it's just become easier. Although I was looking this up for another talk that I gave recently, 42% of businesses in the States are owned by women now, which is great. But they're less in the science and technology and engineering still. And women only get 5% of the startup loans that men do, because I think we're not such big risk takers. We don't borrow 50 million to start a business. We do start small and build probably maybe, and also we probably are. I'm sure women's businesses go bust less often than men's.
Yeah.
Right. Because we're not out there just assuming that we're going to just, it's going to be successful. Follow me. It's going to be successful.
Yeah. So there's been lots of legislation, but it's women like them that stood up and pushed back the barriers and didn't take no for an answer that made it possible for all the women that have come off after them, I think.
Right. And somebody in the chat was talking about, you know, there's the beauty, but there was also, which is a whole other segment of their companies, was their perfumes. And that was just, you know, skyrocketing.
Yeah, because, you know, back then women didn't buy perfume for themselves. That was considered very self-indulgent. A man could buy a woman perfume, a woman could buy another woman's perfume, but you didn't buy it for yourself, you know, and You know, I love the bit where Helena Rubinstein invented Heaven Sent, and her gimmick was to drop it from little parachutes. Was it off Bonwit Teller? I think it was at
Neiman
Bonwit Teller.
Marcus from the roof of department
Yeah.
stores. They were in
Yeah.
little baskets, and all the women shoppers in the streets down below got a little sample vial of her new perfume. And
You
yeah, and
know,
it
I
was
mean,
around about the time that Elizabeth was launching Bluegrass, which was her big perfume of the 30s, which is still around today. And so it was just another way of undercutting her rival, basically. Why
yeah,
not?
just when you think those two can't go any lower, man, they zap it. You know,
I
they
know.
zap each other once again. It's really
And that's what I just
amazing.
love about the book, Jill. And because you wouldn't think, it's like, oh, beauty, very sophisticated, very, you know, and they're just like
Ugly
in there,
business.
and they're just in there with the knives going.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
And I kept
horrible.
going back and forth, like, who was worse? Who was meaner than, you know? And I'm like, oh, it's Elizabeth. And I'm like, no, it's
No.
Elizabeth. No, it's Eleanor.
But that's what makes for such a great book, is that
Yeah.
is that whole thing.
Oh,
All right.
thank you.
So Jill, you answered Renee's question earlier, but Rosemary had a question. So we're going to pose it to you, Renee. How do you decide what you're going to write about next?
It takes a village. It really does. You know, usually it's my agent, my editor, and I sort of putting our heads together, but some of my ideas just come from, like, you know, a friend of mine said, oh, you should really, I had written The Social Graces, didn't know what I was going to write next. And she said, you should look at Estee Lauder. She has a really interesting past. And it was a quick Google search. I'm like, I cannot believe that nobody has written about this. It's like low-hanging fruit. And now I'm writing about the creators of Barbie, which is a book I've wanted to write forever, like long before there was a movie.
I was going to say, you came up with this idea before the movie was out.
Yeah, yeah. So it's been percolating. So now I'm finally getting the chance to write it. I just turned it in. So,
Wow.
and I miss my characters already. I know they're coming back for revision.
They'll come back in the
I
edits.
do miss them.
Did you? And of course, she was in. Ruth Handler was in the Barbie movie, wasn't she?
Yeah, which I was so surprised, and I thought Rhea Perlman was fantastic as Ruth Handler.
So here's a question, just a writer kind of question, Renee, back to you, is that, so you've turned in that manuscript for Barbie. Are you working on something else now, or do you kind of just let yourself take a break and just like?
I'm pretty exhausted, but there is something percolating.
Okay. I love it.
You know, I don't know, Jill, I don't know how you are, but I gotta write. I don't know how to process the world if I'm not writing. Or maybe it's an escape and I don't want to look at the world. So I'd rather go into a fictional world than, you know, turn on the news and, you know, cry. So.
Yeah. No, well, I'm trying to write one a year at the moment, which is quite a lot with the research, writing, and then, you know, come August, I'm sort of jumping up and down doing a bit of media. So it is quite a lot. I don't know how much longer
that is a lot.
do that, but I've already delivered the next book and I'm pitching ideas for the one after. So.
Well, that was what somebody was asking, because that's the thing too, that when you're doing that one a year, you're writing one, probably editing one, and having to talk about one that you wrote like 2 or 3 times ago.
Yeah, and then you get your characters mixed up.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
But Jill, the question is coming to you now is, so you have turned there. Everybody's curious what the next one is about.
I'm not announcing this one yet, partly because we don't have a title and there's a couple of legal issues with it. Yeah, I get it's more in the UK. My books have to go through legal reads usually. I mean, Helen and Elizabeth had to have a legal read in the UK because the company, although the women are dead, the companies still exist. And I was talking about them copying products and so forth. So we just had to check out that I'm not going to have my house taken away from me, you know, in a lawsuit.
Makes it very fascinating. Makes it very
fascinating.
The next book that's coming out next year, so long as the lawyers agree, is set in the 1960s. So I'm sort of leaping forward a bit, which, yeah, I did that with Jackie and Maria as well. I love 2 decades. I love the 20s and the 60s, just because they were decades when things were felt like they were changing very fast, when the young were rebelling against their parents, and so that's.
And the nostalgia is really fun too, of the 60s. Although I'm horrified that the 60s is considered historical fiction.
I know. Me too.
I'm
But
a child of the 60s, you know, no.
But you're so right. Both the fascinating things and fast things were happening in the 60s, because you went from, you know, the early part that was still left over from the late 40s, 50s, and this innocent thing, and then the later 60s where it was just exploding, and what came in the 70s. It's just like, it's a fascinating decade when you look at it as a whole.
The free love, you know, all that stuff.
All of it.
So it was such a pivotal time.
Yeah.
For women, especially, and like the 20s, you know.
Absolutely. And it's
for the nation, but also for women.
There's a fascinating
about the 60s in Park Avenue Summer, Renee. Was that difficult for you? Did you find there were many people still alive who had to be in your novel, or?
Not so much, but people that knew Helen Gurley Brown, and people who had worked at Cosmopolitan magazine. And I befriended a woman who actually regarded Helen Gurley Brown as her second mother. She was Mommy Helen. I was introduced to her, and we just hit it off. She met Helen Gurley Brown at Studio 54. And so she vetted the book. So it was actually really helpful, you know, to have someone who, you know, you're starting like Anna Wintour there. That wasn't Mommy Helen, you know. So.
Well, that has to be a little bit more difficult. Yeah. It has to be a little bit more difficult, because in the 20s, there's still there's lots of people still from the 20s, but that weren't like in their adulthood in the 20s, where there are people from the 60s that are still in, you know, so you do have to have a little bit. You got
to get it right.
But you got in touch
someone will, you know, even when you write about the Gilded Age, someone will point out that the bustle disappeared between 1872 and 1874. And how could you have had a bustle in there? You know?
Oh, wow. Well, maybe some people were old-fashioned and still wearing bustles anyway.
Or couldn't afford to buy new clothes, and they had a bustle.
Renee, I was going to ask, you got in touch with Estee Lauder's son, didn't you?
No, I did not. I didn't. No. I read his memoir, which was wonderful.
Right.
But you know, the Estee Lauder, the company is, and you know, all the family members, they're so protective of Estee's legacy. And there is one narrative about who Estee was, what she did, and Estee set that narrative. It's in her book, and no one veers from that. So it was the first time I didn't go to find family members or something like that, but I was encouraged, like, you know what, you're not going to get anything that is, you know, outside of what Estee wanted everyone to know.
Yeah.
So
I've written nonfiction and ghostwritten memoirs and biographies for people. And if you involve the family, they really want you to give their point of view.
And I was told,
the halo one, you know.
Do you want them on your shoulder while you're writing? I said, write your book. You know, I went through the legal read. Those are nerve-wracking.
Yeah.
You know? And they always point out something that like, really, that's an issue. Like the stuff that you think is going to be, and it's like, I have to come up with like a different name for this one little thing. Okay.
Better safe than sorry. The UK is a bit tighter on all that as well. So any quotes that I've used that were in print, I can use them, short ones, but I've got to credit them at the end of my books in the UK edition, which is fine. You know, obviously, I don't mind doing that at all.
Right. Yeah. Oh, absolutely fascinating, ladies. We could talk beauty and these women all day long. It's so much fun. Cannot wait to have both of you back for your next books.
Anytime.
So much fun.
My goal is to come there in person. I've never been able to. So that's my goal.
We need to get you in person into San Diego for sure, Renee. There's no question about it.
I would love that.
And Jill, you too. We got to get you a crossover here.
I will. I'll do it.
I love it. All right, ladies, have a great rest of your Saturday. Jill, I know it's your evening. Renee, rest of the day. Anybody who's watching here too. What a fun way to spend a Saturday morning here on the West Coast. So thank you everybody.
So much.
Have
and Jill, congratulations.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.